Hi, Tim Cant here, and in this video we're going to examine one of the most important remixes in the history of UK rave music. This track helped define the sound of a new era of breakbeat hardcore with its forward-looking sound selection, production and arrangement, and it still has lessons for us today. Originally titled Gonna Be Alright Cloud 9 remix, the tune I'm talking about is Nookie's era-defining The Sound of Music. So, Nookie is one Gavin Chung who has released tracks under many other pseudonyms, including Cloud9. In late 1992, Cloud9 released the white label Back to Detroit EP, which features the original version of Gonna Be Alright. In 1993, a remixed version appeared on his Return of Nookie EP on Reinforced, credited on the rear sleeve as Gonna Be Alright and on the label as Nookie Gonna Be Alright Cloud9 Remix. However, the track became known as simply Nookie, The Sound of Music, and this is how it was eventually credited on Nookie's identically titled debut LP. Going forward, I'll refer to the original version as Gonna Be Alright and the remix as The Sound of Music. If you're already familiar with The Sound of Music, you might be surprised at how, despite being musically almost identical, Gonna Be Alright has a much less polished production and arrangement. For example, the drum machine intro is much shorter and less developed. The piano has a noisy, lo-fi feel. The anthemic Sound of Music vocal isn't present, and instead we have a snippet from Sharada House Gang featuring Valerie Etienne's It's Gonna Be Alright on the legendary Italo house label Media Records. Now, let's check out the remix. The drum machine intro drums are now more solid sounding techno-inspired 909s with extra sounds used including 4/4 claps. The Gonna Be Alright vocal snippet has been replaced with a longer Vox sample from another Media Records release, Eastside Beats' Diving in the Beat. When it comes to the piano, the lo-fi original version has been replaced with what to my ears sounds like the classic piano sound of the Korg M1. Here we can see Nookie is using minor seventh chords and stepwise melody to create a flowing, jazzy sound that was something of a contrast to the more jarring, rave and dark side sounds that were common at the time. While the drum machines, vocals and piano have been beefed up, other areas have been pared back, specifically this stab section. This section is entirely absent from the remix, and in fact Sound of Music doesn't really have a B section at all. It's really all about a single musical idea that's very effectively stretched out for the entire track using an arrangement that keeps adding and stripping away the elements to keep things moving. Another important element of Sound of Music is the breaks. Gonna Be Alright uses a big, heavy amen and another break with a second generation hip hop feel. Sound of Music keeps the heavy amen, beefs up the kick drums, and uses a more jungleistic think break to accompany them. We also get some half-time break action in there, and bearing in mind this track dropped on dubplate in early 1993, this production is pretty flippin' forward-looking. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that Sound of Music anticipates the direction of both the hardcore and jungle scenes. In terms of jungle, it's big, solid breaks like Think and Amen that became ubiquitous in the 93-94 period, along with more streamlined arrangements that flowed more smoothly. relative to the stop-start antics of 92 style hardcore. As 1993 wore on, rave stabs and Belgian techno-style synths in jungle were becoming passé, and more developed, sometimes jazzier instrumentation was starting to creep in. In terms of hardcore, the sound of music is really DJ friendly with a longer beat-driven intro than Gonna Be Alright, and it also has louder, more dominant kick drums and a focus on sunshine-laden musicality. The Sound of Music was an enormous rave anthem that could be heard on a lot of mixtapes from 93 and 94. It was a tune with phenomenal longevity that only seemed to become more prescient as happy hardcore developed. Nookie released 3 stone-cold piano hardcore bangers in 93 and early 94. In addition to The Sound of Music, we have Shining in the Darkness, also from the Return of Nookie EP. Then there's Give a Little Love, a 1994 remix of Nookie's 1992 track of the same name that updates it to be faster and heavier with a more energetic arrangement. These other tracks are pretty similar to The Sound of Music production and arrangement wise, and they all feature a similar palette of sounds. These are drum machine one-shots, jungleistic breakbeats, piano, strings or pads, sub-bass, vocals, and that's basically it. Instances of sounds like stabs or even FX are extremely rare in these tunes, but they are no means worse off for that. I feel like the influence of these tracks can clearly be heard in the breakbeat happy hardcore of early 1994, in tunes such as Sunshine Productions' Above the Clouds Vibes and Wish Doctor remix with its jazzy pianos. Mystic and Fire True Love remix with its combination of emotive musicality and pounding beats. And Red Alert and Mike Slammer, You Are the One, with its jungleistic breaks and big bass. For me, 94 breakbeat happy hardcore is the apotheosis of breakbeat hardcore. What it loses doing away with the stop-start arrangements and esoteric sampling of 92 hardcore, it makes up for with really robust jungleistic breaks, pumping techno drum machines, weighty sub-bass, and naught but the catchiest piano breakdowns and stabs. Breakbeat happy hardcore didn't have too much of a shelf life as the de facto hardcore rave sound, and by 95 the happy side of the scene was rapidly gravitating towards bouncy techno influences, naive lead lines, and full-on vocals over the jazzier and more jungleistic 94 sound. I doubt this change in direction was much of a concern to Nookie, who didn't really release any more happy hardcore flavoured work after the 1994 release of Give a Little Love. However, alongside the myriad jungle D&B tunes he was putting out at this point, he did drop a few more 4/4 tunes, such as the smooth and jazzy Only You. Then there's the very interesting Highway to Hitchin mix of DJ Trax's High Time. Finally, we have Cloud9 First Symphony, which combines a classic house feel with rolling techno beats. So, what can we learn from Nookie's trio of trend-setting gems? For me, they're a lesson in the importance of fundamentals. Perhaps you've heard the old expression that goes along the lines of, if it's a great tune, it'll still sound good on a trash guitar. Yeah, that's great, but you know what sounds better than a trash guitar? An absolutely sick guitar. Gonna Be Alright sounds good, despite its lo-fi piano sound, but The Sound of Music sounds like $1 million frickin' dollars with its lush M1s. The kick's pumping, the aim and sound slamming, the vocal is sick. These ingredients matter, and if you've struggled to understand what is meant by sound selection is 90% of the battle, perhaps this comparison between Gonna Be Alright and The Sound of Music will elucidate that a bit for you. Another lesson I take from these tracks is that not every tune has to have wild switch-ups and a ton of different ideas. With judicious arrangement, even what is essentially a one-note idea like Sound of Music can make for a supremely satisfying song. Ultimately, Nookie's piano tracks teach us it's not what you do, it's the way you do it that gets results. Sometimes you've got to ditch an okay vocal for one that's absolutely belting. Sometimes you've got to add some tasty drum machine hits to beef things up. Sometimes you've got to hit the listener over the head with your sick idea until they just get it. And maybe, just maybe, sometimes you help invent a new subgenre and then just sack it off to make jazzy jungle instead. If you'd like tuition or any kind of production assistance, book me with the link below. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!